welcome to this online commemoration for Holocaust Memorial Day 2022. My name is Crispin Paling. I'm Rector of Liverpool, and as we begin this service, we are conscious that in previous years we've always met in person. For the second year running, we are having an online commemoration, and whilst that is a regret to so many of us, we're also aware that so many more people will be able to join this commemoration and be inspired and, I hope, also comforted by it. Next year, let's hope that we're meeting in person, but with the pandemic hopefully moving to another stage now, it seems wisest just to remain online for now. The theme for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is One Day, and the Lord Mayor will speak about that in just a moment. But we're also conscious, as we gather in January 22, of the events last week in Texas and the presence of anti-Semitism within our society, as the attack on the synagogue in Texas showed. It is horrific to all of us that these thoughts, this hatred is still there and still amongst us, and that the events of the Holocaust did not eventually banish them. But they are there, and the peace with which we live today is fragile. Only by working together can we overcome the hatred which we so often still see around us. However, we should also take heart that events such as those in Texas are not frequent or everyday events for so many people, and we must ensure that the incidence diminishes as we stand together across all communities to condemn hatred and to move together in what we can do collectively to serve humanity. Our service today will be a selection of speakers and music, and after the musicians from King David's High School in just a moment, we will hear from the Lord Mayor of Liverpool, Councillor Mary Rasmussen.
Lord Lieutenant, High Sheriff, Mayor Joanne, faith representatives, survivors of the Shoah, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Liverpool's Holocaust Memorial Day service. The health pandemic has again meant this year we've had to think differently about how we remember the victims of the Holocaust and more recent genocides. And I would like to thank Jeremy Wolfson, Chair of the Holocaust Memorial Day Planning Group, the Reverend Canon Dr. Crispin Paling, and indeed all of those who have contributed to this, our online virtual service. Today, the 27th of January, marks the 77th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. This is a significant milestone and is made particularly poignant by the dwindling numbers of survivors who were able to share their testimony. It is the National Day of Remembrance for all the victims of the Holocaust and other more recent genocides, such as Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, and Darfur. Today, it is no less harrowing for us, even with the passage of time, and in truth, it never will be. We can't help but be shocked by the incredulity of what took place, showing the darker side of man's inhumanity to man. In the first half of the 20th century, one of the greatest acts of cruelty that the world has ever seen took place in Europe. More than 6 million Jews were systematically murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust, and 5 million other people similarly perished at their hands. The Jews were the main victims of the Nazis, as all were targeted, and the full list leaves everyone who sees it speechless. They were not the only groups. Roma, disabled people, lesbians, homosexuals, black people, trade unionists, and asylum seekers were also persecuted, brutalized, and murdered. To be deemed different was dangerous, often fatal. The theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2022 is one day. There are many ways to interpret the theme. One day for Holocaust Memorial Day. One day in history. One day when life changed. One day in time. One day in the future. Holocaust Memorial Day is one day that we put aside to come together, to remember, to learn about the Holocaust, Nazi persecution, and the genocides that followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur, in the hope that there may be one day in the future with no genocide. We learn more about the past, we empathise with others today, and we take action. Survivors of the Holocaust and of genocide often talk about the one day when everything changed, sometimes for the worse and sometimes for the better. Those who were targeted and persecuted held out for the one day in the future when all their suffering would be over, hoping that they would see the day of liberation. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we learn from genocide for a purpose, to build a better future When we look ahead to one day with no genocide, what do we need to do today to achieve this? We can use this theme to motivate us to speak out when we see injustices, prejudices, and identity-based violence. I was joined by Deputy Mayor of Liverpool, Councillor Jane Corbett, and Rabbi Nathan Fagelman, Allerton Synagogue, to lay wreaths at the memorial stone in St John's Gardens in memory of all victims of persecution. This, together with our online service and education materials used in our schools, is an important part of the city's continuing commitment to promoting understanding and awareness. This commitment was publicly reaffirmed at a full City Council meeting on the 8th of December 2021. Our individual contribution can take many forms, but we must never forget what happened. We must unite in remembering the victims, and we must do all we can to fight the ignorance that breeds prejudice, intolerance, and hatred, which can lead to acts of brutality and evil. It's therefore important. We must never forget the past, and we must educate the future. May I finally thank those who have contributed to today's service, including our guest speaker, Dr. John Goldsmith, Alsop High School, and King David High School. Thank you, and please remain safe. May I now ask you to please join me in 1 minute silence to remember all victims of the Holocaust and turn our thoughts to all who have lost their lives, lost loved ones, or been victims at the hand of persecutors. Thank you.
My name is Rabbi Fagelman of the Allerton Synagogue.
My name is Rabbi Citron of Chilwell Synagogue.
And today, in honor of HMD, we would like to share with you a powerful story and melody that was composed during the era of the Holocaust.
In 1942, where the Jews were deported from their towns to the death camps, on one of these trains, they were sitting together Rabbi Azriel Fastag, the composer of Mozhitz, the Jewish town of Mozhitz, together with his friends.
He began to compose a haunting melody to words from Maimonides' Principles of Faith. Ani Mamin, I believe in the coming of the Messiah. Words that even in the darkest hour would give them all hope.
And this song gave them so much strength. And then Rabbi Fastag said to his friends, the one who is going to save this song, because this song is so important for the following generation, then I promise him to survive the Holocaust.
Two boys saw a slat in the roof of the carriage, and they managed precariously to make their way onto the roof. They jumped off a moving train. One of them, unfortunately, didn't make it, but the other one survived the war and eventually took this melody to the great rabbi of Mojits, who was living in New York.
Ani mamin, ani mamin, ani mamin.
We're now going to complete the memorial prayer.
May they rest in the Garden of Eden.
Therefore, may the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shadow of his wings forever, and may he bind them in the bond of everlasting life. God is their heritage.
And may they rest in their final resting place.
Let us say,
Amen.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Ra'i la'echsar. B'nai ezdah sheyar b'tzeini, al mei menuchos yinahaleni. Nafshi yeshev yancheni, b'maglei tzedek leman shemoi. Kam ki yelech b'geit salmoves, lo yirah ki ato imodi. Shivtecha mishantecha, hey mo yenachamuni. Tarech lefonai shulchan, neged tzoroi. Tishan tov Hashem roishi, chayesir revoyo. Ach toiv v'chesed yedefuni kol yemei chayoi. V'shavti beveis Adonai la'orech yomim. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
The Holocaust remains present to us today as a reminder of the brokenness of humanity. And in the survivors, we see hope for the future. Every year, leaders of Christian churches are privileged to join Liverpool's commemoration of Holocaust Memorial Day and to renew our commitment to stand against the hatred, prejudice and violence which enabled the most horrific events in human history.
Dear friends, on this Holocaust Memorial Day, it's an honour on behalf of the Diocese of Liverpool to stand with you. We commit ourselves and our churches to respect the dignity of all, knowing that it's only by everyone flourishing that the world has a future. We commit ourselves to teach and to learn the truths of the Holocaust in our generation and to the next generation. May those who suffered such atrocities never be forgotten. May we never forget.
We commit our churches to listen to the voice of victims and to advocate for them, wherever they may be. We commit our churches to acknowledge the role we play in the structural and systemic inequalities within our communities and to seek to overcome them.
We commit our churches to continue to speak out against acts of genocide, standing with the innocent and the marginalized. And we commit our churches to speak out against injustice and hatred wherever it is found in our communities.
Honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am honoured to have been invited to give this short address on this sombre occasion by the city in which I have so happily lived for 60 years. My gratitude to this country, which saved me from early persecution and murder, remains unending, and I only hope that my life's work as a doctor has helped to repay this debt, at least in part. was born in Düsseldorf, Germany in 1924 to Jewish parents who separated when I was 3. My father later died of natural causes, but 2 of his sibs, 3 of my 6 aunts and uncles, their families and children, all perished in the camps of the East. My mother, a qualified dental surgeon, in 1932 remarried a Jewish dental colleague who, unwisely in the 1930s, had made no secret of his left-wing sympathies. He thereby incurred the wrath and envy of a rival dentist who happened to be head of the local Nazi party. My stepfather had already suffered imprisonment on trumped-up charges, during which time his house had been ransacked by local Nazis. On the occasion of a second ransacking in 1933, similar to what would be the Kristallnacht 5 years later, a written death threat had been left at his ruined house. He and my mother, therefore, escaped to a friend's house in Düsseldorf. A few days later, 4 masked, armed men invaded the house and dragged my stepfather into a waiting car. The next day, his body was found floating in a water reservoir. He'd been shot through the head and murdered that way. Obviously, this made continued life in Germany impossible for us. Luckily, one of my mother's 3 brothers had been resident in Amsterdam for some years. He took us in, but my mother was unable to obtain a work permit in Holland. However, she managed to find an unpaid morning post in Belgium as a teacher in the Brussels University Dental Hospital, but earned her living by working illegally for a Belgian dentist in the afternoon. My uncle and his housekeeper looked after me in Amsterdam. Aged 9 by now, I happily attended an Amsterdam school and spoke fluent Dutch within a year. For 4 years, I only saw my mother for an occasional weekend and a week during the summer vacations. Luckily, in 1937, the United Kingdom generously permitted a large number of German and Austrian Jewish dentists to come and practice in this country without the need to requalify. We settled in Cambridge, where my mother's practice soon flourished. I attended an excellent Methodist school where I was expected to attend chapel each morning, but I still went to the synagogue on high holidays. By 1940, I had just begun to feel anglicized when, on my 16th birthday, in May that year, the innocent little German boy, so kindly received and nurtured, was suddenly considered an enemy alien, sufficiently dangerous to be interned in Huyton, then the Isle of Man, and then in Canada, where I shared a camp there with, amongst many others, the grandson of the late German Kaiser. Luckily, by December 1940, the UK government had realized the senselessness of interning Jewish refugees, and I was offered the alternative of releasing Canada under the aegis of a local charity, or else of returning to England to my mother and to school. Having chosen the latter, I passed my school certificate, delayed by 1 year through internment, and enrolled as a student in the Guy's Hospital Dental School, but changed my mind and to study medicine only a few weeks later, a change I've never regretted. Qualifying as a doctor in 1947, I obtained 2 junior posts at Guy's Hospital but as Hans Goldschmidt failed entirely, in spite of good testimonials, to be even shortlisted for subsequent junior posts elsewhere. Luckily, at this time, my naturalization came through, and by anglicizing my name to John Goldsmith, I subsequently experienced no further prejudice. After a few GP locums, I took the higher medical qualification of the Royal College of Physicians and began the tenuous NHS path of training to be a hospital consultant. I achieved this objective in 1961 as general physician and physician to the new artificial kidney unit at Sefton General Hospital. This had been started by the urologist Cosby Ross the previous year. In 1979, we transferred to the new Liverpool University Hospital, where I eventually became medical manager during my last 3 years. Retirement at that time was compulsory at the age of 65, but I carried on doing locums in Wales and the Isle of Man for another 5 years. After eventually putting my stethoscope to rest at the age of 71, it still remains a great pleasure for me at the age of 97 to be greeted by former patients and colleagues in Tesco's, Calderstones Park, and in former times at the Philharmonic. During training, I had become interested in kidney disease and was lucky enough to obtain a research fellowship in the United States with Professor Kolff, the inventor of the artificial kidney, as well as Professor Kark in Chicago, an expert on kidney biopsy. This enabled me to develop the existing nucleus of a kidney unit at Sefton General Hospital into a Merseyside-wide kidney and dialysis service. When asked about my attitude towards the current generation of Germans, my reply must be that we cannot blame them for the terrible acts committed by their great-grandparents and grandparents. I have come to realize that we are all born with a potential for both good and evil. Had I been born a German Christian citizen, how would I have reacted to the increasingly vehement German anti-Semitism of the 1930s? Would I have had the moral courage to object if my livelihood or even my freedom were thereby put at risk? Sadly, I do not know. Distrust and persecution of minorities have been a feature of all so-called civilizations since time immemorial. We are all potentially capable of this, and it is fueled by all forms of extremism, religious, political, and racial. For this reason, we must be aware of these evil instincts and therefore, in our own lives, guard against them. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to Allsop High School, Liverpool. The theme for our collective worship is One Day. We set aside one day, January 27th, to come together to remember Holocaust Memorial Day. On this day we gather to reflect and learn about the Holocaust, Nazi persecution, and the genocides that followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. Our hope is that there may be one day in the future with no genocide. Today we encourage you to learn more about the past, to emphasize with others, and collectively to take action to create a better future.
What is Holocaust Memorial Day? The 27th of January is a day set aside to remember the 6 million Jewish people who were systematically persecuted and murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators during the Holocaust. The Holocaust was a mass murder of 6 million innocent Jews by Hitler during World War II. Why the 27th of January? The 27th of January is the day Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi death camp, was liberated. This morning we will listen to the story of Mr. Ziggy Schiffer, BEM, who survived Auschwitz and came to live in the UK. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we also remember other groups of people who were persecuted and murdered by the Nazis. These include Roma and Sinti people, sometimes referred to as gypsies, disabled people, gay people, Jehovah's Witnesses, political opponents, and many others.
To mark Holocaust Memorial Day, you could pick one day in history and learn about that day. Let us think about what happened in Warsaw on 19th of April 1943. Nazi Germany entered Poland in 1939 and started establishing ghettos to segregate, dehumanize and control Jewish people. The largest of the ghettos was in Warsaw, where more than 400,000 Jews were crowded into 1.3 square miles of the city with poor sanitation, limited food and cramped conditions. It is estimated that more than 92,000 people died in the Warsaw ghetto because of the squalid conditions. On one day, 19th of April 1943, the Jewish inhabitants of the Warsaw ghetto fought back against the Nazi regime.
Let us also think about one day in 1995. On the 12th of July, Bosnia was at war and declared independence from Yugoslavia. On this one day, Bosnian Serb troops descended on the town of Srebrenica. They began separating Bosniak men from women and children despite the area having been designated by the UN as a safe area. Over the next couple of days, more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were murdered. The 12th of July 1995 was the last day that many women saw their husbands, fathers, sons and brothers.
Survivors of the Holocaust and of genocide often talk about the one day when everything changed, sometimes for the worse and sometimes for better. Ibby Nil survived the Holocaust, and she writes about the day her life changed. You didn't think about yesterday and tomorrow may not happen. It was only today that you had to cope with, and you got through it as best you could. Ibby Nil feels that from the one day to the next everything changed, and yet nothing had changed. One day Grell, my school friend, greeted me with an embrace. The next day she ran across the road, turned her head away so as not to acknowledge me.
Another Holocaust survivor, Franziska Swartmakers, speaks about how she was sterilised by the Nazis because she was deaf. This was part of the Nazi process of persecuting anyone who did not fit their ideal, in this case because they believed that the disabled people were imperfect and worthless. The Nazis took control of Franziska's body, of her life choices. The Nazis wanted to prevent people they deemed unfit from being able to procreate. It has been estimated that between 1933 and 1939, 360,000 individuals were subjected to forced sterilisation because they had physical or mental disabilities or were perceived to have disabilities.
Butterflies and the Holocaust. At Alsop High School, we have a memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. Here we pause and reflect on the lives of people affected by genocides and to challenge prejudice, discrimination and hatred in our own society today. Our memorial is special. On it you can see many butterflies. You may ask, what do butterflies have to do with the Holocaust? During 1946, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross visited Majdanek concentration camp. When she arrived at the children's barracks, it was particularly sorrowful. She noticed toys and shoes strewn about, but there was something else too. The walls were covered with hundreds of butterflies, scratched and etched with fingernails and pebbles. The children knew they were going to die and were leaving a message of hope. These bodies might not make it, but the butterflies represented their immortal souls. They would live on in a different form. 1.5 million children died in the concentration camps. Each butterfly represents 10,000 children. The mosaic represents their images of hope. The butterflies rise from darkness to the light.
You will also notice the different coloured butterflies. Red butterflies represent the people who died for their political beliefs. Purple butterflies represent Jehovah's Witnesses. Pink butterflies remember homosexuals who were murdered for their sexuality. Brown butterflies remember members of the Roma community. This memorial was produced by Allsop students in 2015 to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. In this concentration camp, over 1.1 million men, women and children died.
This morning, let us listen to the story from a man called Ziggy Shibber, who survived Auschwitz. Ziggy is from Poland and he came to Britain after World War II. He speaks to young people in schools throughout the UK about his experience at the hands of the Nazis. As a survivor, he works tirelessly on behalf of the Holocaust Educational Trust. His testimony is one of struggle and full of hope. He always concludes with 3 simple words: do not hate.
On the 3rd of September 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany. So within 6 weeks, the whole of Poland was occupied by German troops. The day they came into our town, our city, everything changed. First of all, no Jewish child was allowed to go to school. No Jewish teacher was allowed to teach. It didn't matter whether he was teaching in a Jewish school or a non-Jewish school. He wasn't allowed. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, nothing. They weren't allowed to practice their professions. In November 1939, a poster came out, every Jew has got to go to a designated area. We were left with about 150,000 people. There was enough room, maximum, for about 20,000 people to live normal life. We finished up, the 3 of us finished up with 1 solitary room, no bathroom, no toilet, no running water. Wanted to go to the toilet, you went downstairs. Wanted water as well, you had to go downstairs. Can you imagine 20 below zero? So by April the 4th, it was completely surrounded by barbed wire. You couldn't get in, you couldn't get out. Beating didn't worry us. The amount of time we were beaten, it didn't matter because, the pain goes away and you're right. Hunger never goes away. And a lot of people were dying from starvation, disease. And a lot of people were committing suicide. And I always used to ask my grandmother, why are they committing suicide? Surely they want to live. It took me years and years to find out later why they were doing this. Can you imagine a mother losing a child or 2 children from disease or starvation? She didn't want to live. When we came to the railway station, the first thing I said to my grandmother, I can't see any trains. She said, they're standing in front of you. I said, they're cattle trucks. She said, that's all there is. Anyway, they opened the shutters and we had to get in there. They packed us in. There was no way you could sit down. Can you imagine a boy of 14 hoping people should die so he'll have room to sit down? What has become of me? After a few days, unfortunately, there was more room to sit down. We're traveling for another 3 or 4 days. One early morning, through slits of the truck, I could see the word Auschwitz. I didn't know what it meant. Underneath it said Auschwitzim, and somebody said, oh, that's a little town near Krakow. They opened those shutters. They told us to leave our luggage, our suitcases, and we had to get out, jump off from there. Can you imagine children or old people or disabled jumping off a truck? Yeah, most of you have been there that are here tonight, so you know where I arrived in Birkenau. And those people that had to go through the selection, that are pointing right, left, were old people, disabled people, and also children, and also women holding children. And they tried to rip the child out of the woman's arm. The guards came over and they told her to put the child down, but of course she wouldn't. And in many cases, They even shot the baby. When it was finished, they marched them to the showers, so they told them. They packed them into that room, which you have seen. They closed those gates, those shutters. A German guard went up on a ladder. There was an opening there on top, and he threw some Cyclone B gas. Within 20 minutes, all those people were there. Within 1 hour of arriving in Auschwitz-Birkenau, those people were dead. And you know, even today, I ask myself the question, how can a human being do that daytime, and in the evening to sit down with his wife and children, listen to music and eating his dinner? You know, people would think I'm talking about hooligans or crooks or whatever they were. They were people with degrees, doctors, lawyers, engineers, accountants that were doing it, not some thugs. One day 5 boys stole some tobacco that was going for the Germans, and they were caught. They put them in an isolation room. After a week they let them out. We had to come to the square where they let them out. When we came there, we know what's going to happen. Those gallows with ropes hanging down, 5 ropes, put them on the stools, and a German officer, an SS officer, started reading out, prisoner number so-and-so is going to be hanged because of. They couldn't finish the sentence. Those boys jumped off to their death. They wouldn't let the Germans have the satisfaction of killing them. You know, I told you how dehumanized I was, but that scene has never left me. Whenever I talk about it, I think about it. I see 5 young men standing there. They were older than me, standing there. And 20 seconds later, they're hanging their dead. I cannot thank the British people what they did for me. Those boys that liberated me, that gave me my life, but not only my life. I've got 2 daughters, 6 grandchildren. 8 months ago, the greatest thing happened. A great-grandson, you know, for a Holocaust survivor that's lost almost everything. Having children, grandchildren, you know, when I look at them, I look up to heaven, and I say, you see, Hitler did not succeed. He might have killed 6 million of us, but he did not succeed. You approve. I tell the young people, don't hate. We are all the same. What difference is it? Whether you're a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian. It's only different places of worship at the end of the day. There's only one God.
In a moment of silence, we remember the Holocaust. We honour the victims and survivors of all genocides and persecutions. We use a Jewish prayer for the departed, which has been adapted as a memorial prayer for the victims of the Holocaust and Nazi persecution.
O God, who art full of compassion, who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest in thy divine presence to all souls of our holy and pure brethren, whose blood was split by the murderers in Auschwitz, Belzec, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Majdanek, Sobibor, Treblinka, and other concentration camps in Europe, who were killed, strangled, burned, and buried alive for the sanctification for thy name, for whose souls we now pray. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shadow of his wings for eternity, and may he bind their souls in the bond of life. Hashem is their heritage, and may they repose in peace in their resting places. Now let us say, Amen.
Why is it important for us to remember Holocaust Memorial Day? People are still being discriminated against today because of their religion, their race, their sexuality, or other elements of their identity. Whilst we are not at immediate risk of genocide here in the UK, hate speech and prejudice are frequently seen online, and the number of hate crimes recorded each year has been increasing. Outside of the UK, at this very moment, genocide is taking place in the region of Darfur, which is part of the country of Sudan in Africa.
Each of us has the power to stand up and speak out against hatred and prejudice today. We can be the light in the darkness today. Our lights are more powerful when we work together with others. We hope that our film has inspired you to support charities and community groups working to tackle identity-based violence and denial. Holocaust Memorial Day enables us to remember for a purpose. It gives us a responsibility to work for a safer, better future for everyone. Everyone can step up and use their talents to tackle prejudice, discrimination and intolerance wherever we encounter them. Each of us can help make our communities stronger and safer places to live.
How wonderful it is that nobody needs to wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. The words of Anne Frank.
The one that does not remember history is bound to live through it again. The words of George Santayana.
We're coming to the conclusion of our service today. I hope that you have found it inspiring and comforting, and I hope that the themes which have been drawn out are ones which we can take away as we work together in the future. We know that there is still more pandemic to run, and we know as well that there is going to be life afterwards. And so I very much hope that we will meet together next year in person. But for now, let us continue to remember all victims of the Holocaust, and let us remember as well that hatred can always be overcome, and the message we should be giving to those around us is that of hope.